Imagination is a strange but powerful tool that humans possess. We can dream up giant landscapes and faraway kingdoms, creatures unbeknownst to us, concepts that don't exist in our own world. Imagination has been used to explain things we didn't quite understand in older time periods and serve as a fun way to distract ourselves throughout different forms of media nowadays. It's this idea that we can create our own settings, characters, plotlines, and creatures that don't belong in this world that can make things such as Dungeons and Dragons so compelling for many. The ability to go on any adventure in your mind and be swept away by what you create often is much more entertaining than something your average Joe will experience in their day-to-day life. It's with imagination that some of the most popular books came into life and became some of the biggest names in media today. The Hobbit, the Harry Potter series, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, Sherlock Holmes for something a bit more tame. It's weird how the stories we tell ourselves can be so impactful even though they aren't real. I bring this up because if I told you 10 years ago there was this amazing grand adventure you could go on, be whoever you want, go where you want, do what you want to do, you might be more inclined to hear me out. Nowadays it's pretty hard to convince somebody to check out a classic from before their time or something they didn't grow up with. They'll compare it to the shiny new toy that just came out, and from a visual perspective, that shiny toy may look better, but underneath a rough exterior can be a pile of gold if you're willing to dig under that surface. I'm not talking about your Dark Souls, your Skyrims, your Witcher 3s, no. I'm talking about a game from a much simpler time period. A game that's landmass was so massive, it's literally the size of Great Britain. A game just trying to emulate the excitement and joy you could get from a Dungeons and Dragons campaign with your friends. A game that has been thrown back into the discussion due to last year's biggest flop, Starfield.
Leave me alone!
That's right, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about the second Elder Scrolls game, Daggerfall. On the surface, Daggerfall may look like an underwhelming game, especially with some of the groundbreaking stuff you can see today in movies and games, but what it lacks in visual beauty, it more than makes up for in its gameplay, character progression, and world. I'm no fool though to say the game is perfect or this will be for everyone. It most certainly is a game for believers, those with rampant imaginations that can draw more from their experiences than just what they see before them. If you're somebody that's into roleplay, you definitely have an easier time getting accustomed to a game like this than somebody that's never done practical roleplaying or been much to fill in the blanks of a book with their mind. That's not to say that if you've never done either of these things, you can't or shouldn't try out the game though. Rather, you've probably been roleplaying anytime you've played an RPG and just haven't realized it. Role-playing takes place in many forms, and while for me discussing it with you it might sound corny or something you couldn't fathom doing, but it's more than likely something you do naturally and just don't associate with roleplay. Skyrim is a great starting point for our discussion. In Skyrim, you start off as a prisoner in the infamous cart ride. Aside from your time being stolen by this sequence of repeat playthroughs, this is usually where you'll start thinking, what kind of character do I want to play? What weapons will I use? Do I want to wear armor or robes? Will I use a shield or a two-handed weapon? Am I sneaky or loud and jump into the fray of battle? While you might not directly ask yourself questions like this, when you game it's certainly something you'll think about subconsciously while you're playing. It's why we can revisit an RPG more than once and have a different playthrough even though we've experienced the storyline already. For many people, an RPG signifies a character creator, a place where you get to choose how you look. Your height, weight, how long is your hair? What color is it? Do I have a scar on my eye? How did I get this scar? These choices add up and help us immerse ourselves in the character we create, because while they may not be a one-to-one of our real-world appearances or behaviors, it's a projection of how we'd like to see the world on this playthrough, how we'd want to act. A character creator can also help be where we define our builds. For some games such as Souls-likes, this usually means choosing a starting class that will give you a boost towards your intended playstyle. In a game like Diablo, the character you pick determines your skills. So on and so forth, a character creator can mean different things for different games, but ones with gameplay choices I'd argue are more impactful, and when done well, it'll cause you to want to make multiple characters. I've done countless playthroughs in a game like Skyrim. I've played a warrior, a battle mage, a paladin, vampire, werewolf, a thief, the infamous stealth archer to name a few, and while some of these playthroughs weren't super in-depth, or something I played the entire game with, I found fun in all of these excursions into Skyrim for different reasons. I use Skyrim here as an example because while it gets a lot of flack for being baby's first RPG, it is a decent introduction to character creators and multiple playstyles without overwhelming a new player. Simple, sure, but very effective at getting you accustomed to role-playing games. Since then, I've played many different RPGs, some for hundreds of hours and some for an hour. Not every game has been my cup of tea, but I can definitely say they've all added to my experience and enjoyment for the genre. Most recently, I was anticipating Starfield and excited for its release, hoping it'd be a game to draw me back in with that good old Bethesda magic. But I was sorely disappointed and honestly should have seen it coming, considering I didn't enjoy their last two releases. I felt like it was such a disappointment for myself, especially considering the mostly positive reviews it received before release. The things I enjoyed about past titles just weren't there. It felt like such a step back, and I went on to make two videos on it, one about the game specifically, and another on how Procedural Generation is being targeted as a gameplay feature or a net positive for games on its own. Like I said in that video, Proc Gen isn't the worst thing for games, but when it's used as a feature with nothing to support it, whether this is gameplay features, different modules, or sets to combine, it makes the game feel very repetitive and samey with no purpose to what you're doing. Add on to that lackluster quests where I couldn't get invested into most plot points, and it's a recipe for disaster. Under these videos, I was getting comments speaking about Daggerfall, praising it for how good of a game it is, the journeys people have had in this game, and how Starfield manages to be a worse version of this game from 1996. Starfield isn't an open world title, and not a one-to-one with Daggerfall. It does share some similar DNA, but it's a very different game in its gameplay loop, as I feel it strayed from many of the things that make BGS titles fun and a joy to experience. Since people had such a high opinion on Daggerfall, it compelled me to try it out. This isn't from the same Bethesda that made the later titles many people love, such as Oblivion and Skyrim, but I wanted to see if it's up there with how people describe it, or if it was going to be another game that I didn't personally dig. Admittedly, the start was rocky, and I wasn't sure if I would continue the game, but like some other RPGs, the more time I put into it, the more immersed I got into the gameplay loop, the better it became, and then it clicked for me. See, Daggerfall isn't just another RPG. You'll hear many players chalk it up to a fantasy life simulator or a choose-your-own-adventure game, which is a pretty accurate description. I've even heard some people consider it an immersive sim. The world of Daggerfall is extremely vast, so vast it took somebody 69 hours and 33 minutes to traverse the whole thing. There are about 44 different provinces in the Iliac Bay. That number may be off by one or two, different towns, dungeons, people, and quests in each. So how does a large world like this retain a player, or manage to be fun? Here we are with the old debate of, does a bigger world mean a better world? In most cases, I'd argue no. There are plenty of games with gigantic open worlds but aren't revered for just their size alone. Take Assassin's Creed Odyssey. The world in that game is gigantic, but rarely, if ever, have I heard somebody praise its world design, or sights to see. That's not to say it's not a beautiful game. I'd argue it is, but in that same light, the beauty is only surface level for that game. As stated in the introduction, Daggerfall has a rough exterior. The game can be obtuse, difficult, unwelcoming, and downright ruthless. Mostly when trying to dungeon delve, but in many other aspects too. This is a game that chews up greenhorns and spits them out for breakfast, and at certain points I certainly felt out of my element with the game, but all of this ended up enhancing my experience. This video was made using Daggerfall Unity, an updated version of the game created by Daggerfall Workshop according to their website, and a person named DF Interkarma from what I know. This is the original DOSBox version of the game, but ported over to the Unity engine with quality of life features such as an enhanced resolution, draw distance, graphical options, and more. This might confuse some people, but essentially the game at its core is still the same game from 1996. There are numerous bug fixes for glitches, exploits, and other things such as falling through the world map in this version, optional settings to customize the experience for yourself such as making the dungeons smaller, different enemy factions fight each other, or allowing you to hold the attack button down instead of spamming click for those of us trying to avoid carpal tunnel. There is a lot of great things I'll speak about at the end of the video for those interested in trying Daggerfall for themselves, and links will be available in the description for where to get the launcher, how to install it, some guides from other YouTubers or places I personally enjoyed and found helpful in my journey through the Iliac Bay. I know some people hate hearing this, but if you enjoyed this video and thought it was well made, it'd help a lot if you'd subscribe. This shows me that making content for older titles is something people enjoy. It's something I personally do like, and I enjoy visiting older games whether I've played them before or not, so the best indicator for that would be the subscription button. And it's free. With all that mumbo jumbo out of the way, let's journey forth! When booting up Daggerfall for the first time after hitting a new game, the first thing we're greeted with is the character creator. As we discussed in our brief section on roleplay, it's something we do whether intentional or by accident as we play role-playing games, hence the name. The playstyle you choose and the choices you make here can very well dictate your entire experience in any game. I'm not just talking about what's strong or what's considered weak in the game, but from a narrative perspective. Your playstyle heavily dictates your story as your character is the driving force in which you'll experience the political conflict between the three kingdoms of Daggerfall, Wayrest, and Sentinel, but also the personal gameplay moments that you have in between quests. Do you become a thief that loots people in cities until you get caught and bounce to the next town? Are you the murderous sort that offs people for fun? Perhaps you're loved by the people and decide to join their knightly order to help better protect them. Playstyles, factions, people you choose to help, the choices you make during the main quest, all of these can define your experience and shape what you do, or how you overcome challenges in Daggerfall. This is a game where, while the story doesn't revolve around you per se, you are still a big factor in it, and are experiencing your own story while journeying throughout this region at the same time. Honestly, you could even ignore the main quest to do things that you find more intriguing. Daggerfall very much so will grant you as much as you give it from a variety of angles, but it doesn't give easy at the start. When you first start up a new game, you'll be asked to pick your character's race. Imperials and Orcs are not available races in Daggerfall. Imperials were not a race until Redguard, and Orcs are not for narrative reasons which become apparent in the story. That leaves us with High Elves, Redguards, Bredons, Nords, Dark Elves, Argonians, Khajiit, and Wood Elves. Each race has some inherent bonuses, such as High Elves being immune to paralysis, Redguards have an increased chance to hit, Dark Elves have this bonus as well, but it's weaker. Argonians can breathe underwater longer than other races, Wood Elves also have a bonus to hit, but it only applies to archery. Each race has something going for it. Some bonuses might be better than others, but for the most part, it's not going to make or break your character. This is just an added layer of choice you have and can shape how prepared your character is in some situations over another at the start. After selecting your race, you're asked if you'd like to take a quiz to select your class. I did it for my first playthrough for fun and got Battle Mage, so I went with that. On my second, I decided to make a similar class but use the custom class maker myself instead of going with the quiz. You can still pick a different class if you don't like what you got from the quiz, so there's no harm in checking it out. Where the game really shines for character creator is what you come up with yourself. This is where the identity and background of your character gets materialized. One of the strongest points in Daggerfall is the character creator. How you experience quests, combat, dungeons, and the story will be different depending on the strong suits you select. With that being said, here is where we pick our skills. Now, if you've never played D&D, a different tabletop, or CRPG, classic role-playing game, you might not be very familiar with how to structure your character here, but it's not too bad. Skills are split into 4 categories: primary, major, minor, and miscellaneous. Primary skills are your most important. They receive the biggest boost at the start of the game and can contribute the most to your level ups. Skyrim shares some similarities with Daggerfall in that the use of skills contributes to your next level, but this only applies to the skills in your primary, major, and minor slots in Daggerfall. Skills in the miscellaneous category will not contribute to your level up, but if you'd like to use them in your build, you still can. Primary contributes the most to your levels, the 2 current highest major skills contribute to your next level up, The highest level minor skill also contributes to your next level. Unlike Oblivion, you won't need to min-max this system to have fun. You'll want some decent combat skills for sure, but you don't need to watch your level ups and feel shoehorned into using certain skills if another increases and such. You can min-max levels if you need to, but I've completed the main campaign with a character that only reached level 11 when the max level is 30 or 32 depending on if you're min-maxing. The level progress isn't infinite as some other games, and you don't need to do heavy grinding to be able to enjoy the game. The extra levels will definitely make the game easier and would allow you to complete content in one go, but it's a pretty chill game progression wise, which also makes your skill increases and levels more important. I want to discuss this more in the combat section to drive it home, but the skill system is awesome. It allows you to fine-tune a character by setting restrictions on what they'll be capable of, but not outright excluding you from trying different combat styles or abilities if it interests you. This restriction might sound bad, but it keeps the playthrough focused and can allow characters to offer different experiences to the player after multiple runs, which is a joy. For example, a character that specializes in climbing can cross gaps and explore different areas without relying on magic, such as a mage that uses levitation to get to and from either large gaps or to higher up levels. Aside from skills, we also have a dagger on the right. While some players would advise you it's best to let the dagger fall, let me have this, I'm a fan of corny jokes and this should be the only one. I believe keeping the dagger somewhere in the middle or towards the top of the meter is preferable. The dagger serves as a way to determine how fast or slow your character will level. While I did say Daggerfall can be beaten at a very low level, I don't recommend bum rushing the level of process to hit 10 or higher and beat the game like that. Not that you can't, but the world of Daggerfall is a beast of its own, and will tear you apart if you're not well equipped for the dangers the world can present. There are creatures that will inflict you with diseases, poisons, and can straight up eat you alive if you're ill-equipped to go dungeon delving in this game. That's neither here nor there though. The dagger can be influenced by a few different factors. One would be lowering or raising the amount of hit points you'll get per level up. If you raise it to the maximum of 30 hit points, this raises the dagger higher, the lowest being 8 hit points will lower it. This dagger can also be influenced by the special advantages and disadvantages you decide for your character. A cool system that allows for not just build variety, but also adds some character to your playthrough. Perhaps you want to be a mage, so you have an increased magic pool, but since this will slow down your leveling significantly, you could take some disadvantages such as being afraid of imps. The advantages can range from extra proficiency in a weapon you like to straight immunity from diseases or paralysis. They can be very strong, thus making your level progression slower to balance it out. This isn't necessarily a bad thing though, which is something I like about Daggerfall. Afterwards, we have the ability to alter our attributes slightly, such as subtracting some values from strength in favor of a higher agility stat so we can hit enemies much more consistently, even if we're not hitting as hard. Attributes all start at 50 and can be rearranged anywhere from 10 to 75 during character creation, allowing you to be a specialist in some areas and have a great advantage, such as intelligence giving you more mana to pull from if you want with the special advantage we just spoke about, or taking proficiency in one weapon type along with your high agility. Each stat governs a different skill for your character, which gives you agency over things down to the last minute detail. Strength increases how strong your hits will be with melee weapons, unarmed, and also helps you carry more things. Endurance governs your hit points, healing rate, resistance to poisons and disease. You get the idea. Each stat has a different reason to upgrade, and depending on how you want to play, these choices may differ. Maybe you're someone that values safety, so you'll want more endurance than the player that specs into speed so they can run through dungeons. Or maybe you're a hoarder like me, so you build strength even though you don't need it because most of your damage comes from being a mage. Now we're given the choice to take one little questionnaire to buff up some stats and potentially pick some items for the journey. These choices are flavor text, but they do have gameplay implications, such as changing your standing with some factions or groups of people depending on what you pick. You can also gain some powerful items early on, such as the Ebony Dagger, which will allow you to deal with difficult enemies until you loot some better gear. Once we've created our character, we are greeted with the introductory cutscene where we meet with Emperor Uriel Septim VII, and he asks us to investigate why the former king of Daggerfall, Lysandus, is haunting the streets screaming vengeance in the middle of the night. Before we set out, he also asks a personal favor of us. The Emperor needs us to look for a letter he sent out to the Queen of Daggerfall and destroy it if it comes into our possession, as it's of a personal matter. After our brief meeting, we set sail for the kingdom of Daggerfall. But on our way to the kingdom, our ship ran into some trouble and we became shipwrecked in a storm of great strength, only able to swim to a nearby cave where we rested until we got caved in. Before you lose hope and assume we'll be buried alive, there seems to be another passageway that may lead out. Welcome to Privateer's Hold, the first of many dungeons. The majority of your time in Daggerfall will be spent in dungeons. Aside from the ones tied to main story missions such as Privateer's Hold, you may feel like the ones you get sent out to for side quests are random or there is no rhyme or reason to these dungeons, but that isn't quite the case. Dungeons are arguably one of, if not the most important talking points when it comes to Daggerfall. So much of the game's loop and systems tie right back into dungeon crawling, instead of the focal point of the game being based on quests or the ongoing narrative. The majority of our content also takes place in dungeons, questing, combat, and character progression. While these activities can also be done in the open world or in towns, it's not as often nor as lucrative as it is when dungeon delving. Like the rest of the game world, the dungeons of Daggerfall were procedurally generated when creating the game. They're static, and there are actually some handcrafted dungeons for the main story with puzzles or unique textures and areas to see. Upon your first few times either doing quests or just deciding to explore them yourself though, you might find yourself frustrated or as if there's no rhyme or reason to why anything is the way it is, and this is somewhat true. Dungeons are gigantic, include many pathways, dead ends, secret doors, traps, elevators, you get the gist. While this might sound enticing to some if you come from modern Bethesda titles or other RPGs from our current day, you might feel dumbfounded or disappointed at what awaits you. Not because it's bad, but it is very different from the design principles we're used to in today's games, such as the recently controversial yellow tape and markers being used to point players in the right direction. That's not to say there's no way to tell where your objective is or what to do, but sometimes it is up to chance, such as if you're tasked to find an ingredient for the Mages Guild, it could be on the first door on your left, or maybe you're left there studying the walls and objects, clicking on everything hoping a secret passageway opens up to an item you need. Depending on the quests such as rescue missions for missing nobility, typically they are found in the depths of a dungeon or underneath a trapdoor that you'll only get to after you've explored a large chunk of it. Is this a bad thing? Not necessarily, but it does mean that dungeons will take a while for a newcomer, and since there are no visual cues to signify when you get closer, or if there's anything of interest in an area, it requires you to heavily inspect each and every wall, object, skull, bookcase, and teleporter. Some people will like this sort of design as you're fumbling in the dark, and it brings a certain mystique and danger to each and every dungeon you visit, as now not only are you unsure of where your quest objective is or how to get to it, but you must also take into account the enemies you may encounter, how many there are, room layouts, and do all this while navigating in hopes of getting closer to your goal. The benefit of areas like the Daggerfall dungeons is that because they were procedurally generated and there isn't necessarily an intended thing the developers wanted you to experience aside from the main story areas in these dungeons, you can just leave when you find what you're looking for or complete your objective. Like I said earlier though, the dungeons can be frustrating for a newcomer. At least they definitely were for myself. It was as if any existing knowledge I had from gaming in general was thrown out the window and Sheogorath was my dungeon master, making my experience grueling, disorienting, and tedious, but this didn't persist. Instead, as I played the game, I realized that, while it wasn't what I was expecting, I was still enjoying myself once I came to grips with the game and my character progressed. You go from this blundering idiot to an experienced, hardened adventurer. The progress isn't something tangible from the game, such as, hey, you're doing a great job, buddy, but rather it's something you feel in yourself. This is not just about dungeons, but everything. I went from thinking the combat will be a walk in the park like newer BGS titles, but as I leveled up and encountered dangerous foes, I needed to take into account curatives such as potions of free action or energy potions when encountering scorpions or vampires, being wary of werewolves due to potentially contracting lycanthropy, making sure not to take on too many foes at once since early on you'll struggle hitting most foes and probably prefer to take them out one-on-one. Your combat prowess increases not just from actual experience, but also in your character skills. Every time you swing your weapon, cast a spell, rest, run, dodge, uncover an enchanted item, your character grows in power. It's a relatively slow climb, but it feels natural and super fun to experience firsthand. The game accomplishes a nice progression loop through a few different systems, but arguably my favorite of the bunch is hit chance. Hit chance is something I'm sure fans of turn-based or CRPGs are used to, but if you only play role-playing games of the open world or action style, then this will be a foreign concept to you. When fighting enemies in Daggerfall, even if it looks like your weapon should be hitting the enemy, you can miss, like in Pokemon. This becomes less and less common as you improve your weapon skill, but at the start you'll be struggling to even hit a common rat. I love this due to how it adds to the progress you can feel and see in the game world. Games like Dark Souls accomplish this concept by taking enemies you once fought as bosses or mini-bosses and making them common enemy types later on to signify how far you've progressed and that these are much easier for you to deal with now. Hit chance allows for a similar sort of progression that isn't tied to enemy types but rather your character. The more you swing your weapon, not only do your hits become more consistent, going from a 3% chance at the lowest up to a 97% chance once you've mastered your weapon of choice, you also become efficient. Less energy is required to fight each enemy, less swings, and less time speeding up dungeons in turn. This could sound silly if you've never played a game with hit chance, but it's honestly something I wish stuck around in future titles. Hit chance allows for not just you to feel as if you're getting stronger, but can make encounters with dangerous enemies much scarier as well. In our first ever dungeon, Privateer's Hold, the first few enemy types you encounter are just rats and bats. They can give you a bit of trouble, but realistically most people will get through these and be like, okay, but a few rooms down we run into bandits, a skeleton, and an imp. These enemies, while being somewhat common, for a fresh character are extremely dangerous. They teach you the value of sometimes running away from a fight is better, or that preparation and strategy is important when facing stronger foes, such as not taking on too many at once, running back the way you came, and using terrain such as stairs to split enemies up and gain an advantage, or a table to put some distance between you and foes. This in-the-moment thinking and decision-making rewards a player for memorizing their surroundings and coming up with plans that aren't present in every RPG, and it's nice as these can lead to fun, unscripted moments, a more emergent narrative than scripted moments where the game is trying to make you feel cool. Instead, it's something you experience for yourself. It's unique and becomes a memory of your time playing that game, that you can regale as a story to others and leads to fun community moments that we don't see all the time. Combat has a lot of depth to it. Another great addition is the importance of material type versus the enemy you're fighting. We start off finding iron weapons mostly in Daggerfall, and they are abysmal. Decent against maybe rats, but since different enemies don't scale with you, when you run into tougher foes such as a rogue or skeleton with a higher dodge chance, then you'll be in that fight for a good while trying to do any meaningful damage. This is where acquiring better gear comes into play, not just as a higher damage number, but also that it'll hit consistently and can add to the immersion as a rare material makes the game world exciting. Finding a random orcish armor piece or your first mithril weapon will be exciting as it now means you can tackle harder challenges and be prepared for it. Enemy type also comes into play as alluded to above. Not only does it require you to pay attention and be careful when exploring as to not put yourself in a bad spot, but it can enhance the questing experience when being tasked to fight stronger foes. One of my most memorable quests was when sent out to take on a lich for the first time. I've never seen one in a dungeon randomly. Being tackled to take one on was an exciting prospect as not only am I now fighting through a dangerous dungeon with vampires or wraiths, but I know my target is a foe even stronger than them. Enemies in Daggerfall don't scale with you, such as in games like Oblivion and Skyrim, and while this may sound like a bad thing to some, as it means maybe some content becomes irrelevant, this isn't the case. In Daggerfall, due to loot being more so level dependent on the player's end, and your skills improving on a per use basis over taking on much more challenging foes consistently. Enemies not scaling means that when you do run into these higher foes though, and you will if you intend on completing the main story, your preparation, knowledge, and build become checked by what you're fighting. It's not black and white, as this game still has action elements such as positioning, animations, and experience of the enemy type, but depending on how well equipped you are, you can exterminate foes better or worse, and will change each player's experience with every encounter. One of my characters was a battle mage that didn't struggle with scorpions or spiders, as I could dispatch of them from far away with AoE spells or cure paralysis. But enemies that ran directly at me would be tougher since I'm relying on my speed and baiting attacks to keep them at bay till they're dead. While with a melee weapon you can knock back foes, you have to get close, but I wouldn't say you're under-equipped or at a heavy disadvantage compared to mages. There is no mana bar or cost to take into account when swinging your weapon, aside from a bit of energy loss or durability, but these are negligible and easy to keep in check aside from maybe fighting vampires. Enemy variety is a big part of the dungeon experience as it changes the battle encounters. whether that's what you need to avoid, how to dispatch foes better, and what you prepare for each dungeon delve. Speaking of magic, this is one of the highlights of Daggerfall and arguably one of the more interesting magic systems I've messed around with in an RPG with tabletop elements. Many people will point to games such as Divinity Original Sin 2 or Baldur's Gate 3 for great magic systems, and while I agree there's a lot going on there, what I like about Daggerfall is that it grounds you in the character you play. You're first person, the character's eyes are your eyes, you don't have people to rely on, and this actually enhances the magic aside from just damaging spells. There are so many cool things you can do: turn yourself invisible, fly, give yourself a speed boost, spell absorption, set teleport points to recall after you've completed a dungeon, and the best part, you can mix and match the effects I just listed and many more to make your own unique spells and how they interact with the game world. You can name them whatever you want, decide the cost, how effective they are. What type of spell is it, single target, area of effect, a self-cast if it's a fire spell, lightning, etc. There's a ton of experimentation for the creative, and magic is one of the systems that, while you don't need to interact with directly, it's definitely one of Daggerfall's highlights, and I'd recommend it's worth experiencing on any character. Even if you're a stickler that doesn't want to use magic, this is where magic or enchanted items come into play. They allow you to use the abilities of a mage to heal yourself, fly, cast spells, teleport, you name it, you can do it. It's just a matter of finding the item, whether it's in a dungeon or a shop, and when you want to use it. On first glance, this may sound overpowered or cheesy as it allows you to bypass the magic system. While that is true, it comes at the drawback of these items not being permanent. They have durability and cannot be repaired in the base game, which is awesome. As now, while you might be able to access these magical powers, you need to be choosy where you use it. Is it worth casting a fireball on this one enemy, or should I save it for a group? Should I use my free action potion or item now, or save it just in case I run into a creature that can use paralysis? Questions like these arise while you play, and if you're a hoarder like myself, you'll be hoarding around 10 to 20 magic items even though you'll only use like 3 of them. Just in case, right? Daggerfall does a lot to accommodate a wide variety of playstyles. This can make the combat and overall dungeon experience extremely engaging aside from just learning layouts or how the different mechanisms work. There will always be something to be excited about or some mystery to look forward to, and it's unique to each player. We might all end up looking like fire trucks at the end in our Daedric gear, but that journey there is different for all of us and what makes this game a unique experience. So, we've just found the exit to Privateer's Hold. Hopefully you didn't have too much trouble and are ready for our next steps. From here on out, that's it. The game is entirely open to you and what you want to do. No requirements here, no you need to do X, Y, and Z to move on and find something you'd like. You can sail across the seas, you can go to a town nearby and hunker down for a bit, taking quests for the locals, join a guild, join a knightly organization, assist the nobility to garner their favor. Maybe you hate the province you're in, so you take out a loan and buy a boat or a house elsewhere, and you never come back. Daggerfall really is about your story and what you'd like to do. Because while there is a main quest, you don't necessarily need to concern yourself with it. After all, the Emperor gave you this quest, but it's not like you have an obligation to complete it. We also have this gigantic landscape to check out. Open space is an interesting concept that can be exciting. New areas to visit, locations to learn about, people to meet, cultures, and quests or content to experience. At the start of Starfield, once you get access to your spaceship and you're able to visit any star system or planet, the possibilities seem limitless to I and many others. A true go anywhere, do anything game, an evolution of the Bethesda formula people love. But as you start to explore and visit new locations, and inhabited or not, it dawns on you that there really is a whole lot of nothing to see in the settled systems, with nothing to make up for this fact, or at least enhance it for the player. This can take the concept of open space or open world, and instead of filling you with excitement, it's dread now, for the nothing you need to trudge through to get the meaningful experiences. For a new player in Daggerfall, you could arguably have a similar experience or be let down if you go into the game with preconceived notions for how open world games function under today's standards, and be completely shocked with what you get. The Iliac Bay is vast, there are a ton of places to visit, and it is indeed the size of Great Britain. That wasn't clickbait. But a giant landscape doesn't mean a great landscape, and that couldn't be truer for Daggerfall. After you've escaped from Privateer's Hold, you could be excited to see what's around. I'm sure most people would instinctively wander off into a random direction if they opted to not follow the tutorial. If you did choose to follow the tutorial, it tells you to fast travel to Daggerfall, which isn't a bad idea, but we'll discuss that in a bit. Today's gamers arguably need a bit more guidance to come to grips with a game like this that is so different and challenges our pre-existing notions of what an open world game is meant to be. The open world of Daggerfall is unremarkable. It is dull, and it can feel like a whole lot of nothing if you're unwilling to suspend a bit of disbelief for the sake of the game and use your imagination. Saying all that though, the landscape being vast here is actually a positive. While it won't be apparent at first glance, and is actually something I debated with myself back and forth on if I enjoyed how big the landmass was at the expense of a structured or linear story, if you try to walk without using the fast travel from one point to another, you'll quickly realize how draining and dull this can be. There is quite literally nothing to experience out in the open world in vanilla Daggerfall. You won't find random NPCs doling out quests, stopped by bandits, random caves to wander into, not in the traditional sense at least, and I know this is a deal breaker for many, but no dragon attacks. So if there's nothing to see when you're walking around, how can a gigantic landscape be a positive? Well, this took some challenging of my own beliefs and ideals of what makes a fun open world role-playing game. I had to question why I enjoy open worlds and if it really matters when I have fast traveled a ton in games such as Skyrim or even more recently Tears of the Kingdom. And with Starfield it was the only option to get around. So I asked myself, how can I enjoy a game that uses fast traveling as a focus and mechanic, but hate another that has a similar concept? And I drew a few different conclusions. Starfield is a game where fast travel is your only option to get to different planets. Daggerfall is an open world game where fast travel is heavily implied as the best option to get around. You could theoretically walk everywhere, it's even been done, but it's not something I ever attempted while playing the game, and it dawned on me. The reason why fast travel in Daggerfall isn't seen as a negative, especially when in the discussion for Elder Scrolls games, isn't just due to having the option to go there yourself, but because of the scale of the world. It's not just a number such as 1,000 planets, but actual land you can walk over and see the distance in between two locations with your own eyes. This added layer of allowing the player to do things manually, albeit inefficiently, letting them trek this journey does more than excluding it altogether and having me feel the weight of the multiple menus anytime I need to do things. Aside from just being able to take the journey myself, Daggerfall has a heavy emphasis on time. Any quest you accept, action you take, trial you undergo takes time. Not just playtime like every other game, but actual in-game time is more of a gameplay system than the later games. Quests we receive, whether it's for the main quest, guild quest, or a side quest, all have a deadline that they must be done by. Repairing armor takes in-game hours, if not days, depending on how strong the material is. After combat, when we need to rest to recuperate our mana, health, and energy, or to level skills, takes in-game time. With all this emphasis on actions having a cost, with resources and time, it causes you to now become pickier and think about what actions you'll take in dungeons, or when navigating objectives you need to deal with. Attempting to take less damage in dungeons, find efficient ways to dispatch foes for the least amount of resources so we can progress without passing the in-game clock. It still goes down as a we play and the game has a day and night cycle, but it's slower when you don't have to rest or travel around as much, thus immersing the player into the game world with objectives to complete and the actual prospect of failure. Some of the most remarkable moments I've had in Daggerfall are some of the simplest things. I got infected with lycanthropy pretty early on one of my playthroughs and was tasked to save a princess from a vampire. While doing the dungeon, I rested too many times, causing so much time to pass that my character became hungry for the blood of an innocent, leaving me at 1 HP with no way to quench my thirst and only 8 days left to complete the quest. I was screwed. The closest towns were too far away to murder somebody and come back and still make it to the quest giver on time, so I was forced to just give up on the quest and leave the princess to her fate. I could have reloaded the save, I could have probably gotten rid of the disease some way, but not knowing any real solutions, I was stumped and forced to accept the failure on my record. It stung a bit, but it made the game feel tangible and like I wasn't this infallible being where quests depended on me to resolve all the world's problems. And it hit me that I don't need to force myself to do quests I don't like in this game. This offered me a newfound freedom we don't normally see in newer games, and it was refreshing to say, no, I don't feel like doing this, even though I've accepted the quest already. This might sound contradictory considering I just brought up how time helps ground you into doing activities and the world scale, but on the contrary, while I can choose to not do some quests, more often than not, I'd still want to complete them due to getting rewards such as gold or faction reputation to access other benefits in different groups. While Daggerfall may be weird for newcomers due to how hard it can challenge preconceptions on open world games, It is still a fun experience and world to travel in its own right. Other points relating to the topic, but I wasn't sure how to fit in, would be that I much prefer a medieval aesthetic over a science fiction story, and that could be partially why I was willing to accept the way this game works over Starfield. The character creator offers a lot more variance and customizability in Daggerfall, which allowed me to do things I want to do and not feel shoehorned into doing specific tasks to level up. This kept the game very freeform, and I never felt ushered into doing something specific. A question that I've been thinking about after Daggerfall is that would I enjoy Starfield more with my new experience? It's hard to say, but I also don't feel eager to give Starfield a second chance all the same. With the open world being so vast, and players potentially feeling lost on how to progress, considering the world won't revolve around their every move, I've no doubt some people might raise the question, what is the point in playing? Or rather, what is there to experience if the world can be so apathetic? Well, aside from applying this thought process to real life, there are still things to experience even if the giant world seems a bit less interesting now. The best place to start would be by picking a region or town in the province of Daggerfall, or another area, and settling down for a bit as you become accustomed to the way the game works. But this isn't hard advice. You are quite literally free to do anything, especially since the main story quest cannot progress until you hit certain level thresholds, aside from just finishing up the quest beforehand. So, since you can't rush the main quest, where can we get started? Well, the starting location that many recommend would be the small town of Gothway Garden to our south, directly from Privateer's Hold. This is an instance where a location is pretty close to where we started from and is within walking distance. Gothway Garden, and many towns like it across the Iliac Bay, typically have everything you need, whether it's guild halls, civilians, shops, blacksmiths, temples, and even knightly orders to join. Here is where we can get more into our character's roleplay and where the bulk of our dealings resolve, as the gameplay loop of Daggerfall typically falls under receiving a quest, going to another town or a dungeon, complete whatever the quest requires of you, and return to town to scope out new opportunities. This might sound repetitive from the sound of it, and if you're looking for the most mind-blowing gameplay experience tailor-made by the developers, well, maybe it will be disappointing or not something for you, but I quite enjoyed myself once I got into the thick of things. Daggerfall uses random quests, or I guess Radiant quests now as dubbed by Todd Howard, for most of the content to get you to each locale. The quests themselves use a flavor text to help provide some structure and storytelling to each task you do, so it's not just as basic as kill X amount of mobs or loot X amount of items. This distinction might not sound like much, but it shows that the developers actually cared about the gameplay loop and tried to offer the player desire to do things depending on how your character would act or what you deem worthwhile. There's even specific responses when you decide to decline quests of different types, which is a nice quality touch we don't see from modern Bethesda. The gameplay loop of Daggerfall typically revolves around you being a handyman. You scour the towns in search of work and quests to venture forth into dungeons or into people's homes, either to be an exterminator or maybe a bodyguard from rogue assassins. Whether you're looking for work, people to converse with, a way to get your foot in the door, Gothway Garden is as good a starting point as any. You're also free to go to a completely different region of the map and start your journey there. You could also just go delving into random dungeons if that tickles your fancy, but in general, you'll want to look for quests to undertake, not just for a bit of purpose, but also because it's a free reward while you're dungeon delving anyway. The benefit to undertaking quests from guilds, knightly orders, temples, or some secret organizations such as vampire families allows you to rank up in each group and receive different benefits. Joining the Dark Brotherhood allows you to create your own potions, mages are able to identify enchanted gear, craft their own spells, and enchant items, and even get a teleporter at higher ranks. The Fighters Guild offers training and repairs, knightly orders give you free armor as you rank up, free inn-stays in your region, then everywhere in the Iliac Bay, no ship charges, and even a free house eventually. Each group has its own strengths and weaknesses, and has tangible benefits aside from a title that doesn't do much or change what you do in guilds, which is nice and adds to the progression you'll make. As you slowly establish yourself in the Iliac Bay, level up, and garner some experience, you'll receive a letter from a Lady Briziana asking you to meet to discuss the state of affairs in the Iliac Bay and some directions on how to proceed with the main quest. The main quest in Daggerfall is interesting and a much different approach from the games that follow it. Aside from Oblivion's plotline, Morrowind and Skyrim technically both feature power trips in terms of lore and the story. People will tell you Morrowind handles it better, but as I have not played it, I don't really have a comment on this point. In Daggerfall, while you aren't the chosen one or some ultra powerful being, you still have an important role to play. You essentially get to play Kingmaker in this entry of the series. As you progress the main quest, you become acquainted with the 3 different kingdoms of Daggerfall, Sentinel, and Wayrest, and will learn about the nobility in each kingdom. Some quests are arguably more interesting than others in terms of locations and the overall writing, but it helps you learn more about each group of nobility, and depending on who you are, you may draw different conclusions. After interacting with the different groups and talking to them about developments, I came to the conclusion that everyone sucks as is, so I opted to side with the Emperor in the end since I at least somewhat knew the Emperor before coming to the Iliac Bay. Was that the best or wisest choice? Well, maybe not, because the game has 7 endings you can get depending on who you side with in the end. There are a ton of turns and cool revelations you'll learn about each faction and what caused Lizandus to haunt his own kingdom, along with what the Emperor's letter really said. You get to see the story unfold from an outsider's perspective, which is nice because the game doesn't decide who are the good guys or bad guys at the start and remains morally gray throughout, allowing you to come to your own conclusions and even get some interesting twists. For example, presenting the letter to the wrong people once you received it will cause them to send assassins after you to silence you for what's really going on in the game. Not every questline will be fleshed out with options or choices, and typically they're straightforward with 1 or 2 choices, but the gameplay variants along with puzzles and dungeon crawling make up for that fact. There are interesting locations unique to the main quest that you'll visit, some that won't show up on your map until you've completed certain objectives. There is also a sense of discovery with some areas. While some will appear on the map, you can also find them yourself if you pay attention to the dialogue, which is awesome. I ended up exploring some of the dungeons a bit early and got whooped due to not being prepared. It's different from the rest of the series in a good way, and if you just do one playthrough for the story, I'd still say it's worth it. The Daggerfall Unity version comes with many great additions and quality of life features. It's also a free upgrade once you downloaded the DOSBox version of Daggerfall from Steam, GOG, or from Bethesda's website. The game is free, so if this video did anything to interest you into playing, I'd encourage you to give it a shot, and hopefully it'll open more people up to RPGs that aren't just following what we've come to expect. The Unity version has bug fixes for the original. Some of the things I experienced while playing the DOSBox version was falling through the map and the audio glitching out if I attempted to edit it with the in-game settings. It also made recording finicky when it didn't need to. The Daggerfall Unity version fixes these amongst some other issues. There are some neat quality of life features and improvements to the gameplay. None of these are on by default, so if you want the vanilla experience, you'll have it. But you can enable things such as holding down the attack button to keep swinging your weapon, or climbing being omnidirectional over just vertical such as in the base game. You can make dungeons smaller for those that don't want to spend all their time in one location and would prefer to knock out multiple quests. I enjoyed playing the game this way, but I have also enjoyed the massive default dungeons, so I do recommend experimenting with both. Since Daggerfall has been ported over to the Unity engine, this also opened the game up to being moddable by many different mod authors. There are a ton of cool options such as graphical mods adding more textures to the base game, or even changing the game's look with texture packs like Dream, or adding 3D models to the game for monsters and animals. There's some nice quality of life mods such as adding a hotbar to the game so you don't have to consistently open your menu to access new spells, weapons, or other interactable items, and keeping the game flow going. I don't really see a reason for most people to play the original DOSBox version, considering this is just an improved port, but with the benefit of many creative people adding to the project. It does require higher specifications to run than the DOSBox version though, so if you're trying to run Daggerfall on an older machine, you might be better off running the DOSBox variant. Daggerfall is an experience and a game unlike most that we get by modern studios, especially those within the AAA space. Dungeon crawlers do exist, and arguably you can see many RPGs as dungeon crawlers if you ignore their stories and such, but I'd argue it doesn't have the same feeling as a game dedicated to that concept, and using the RPG elements to enhance it. Potentially some mad men or women will make a sort of successor or game in this style in the future, but until something comes out, I can't say there's another like it. It's not a perfect game by any means, nor is it the best of this category, but for what Daggerfall was going for, I'd say it was a success. It's still discussed to this day, and the Elder Scrolls series continued from that point onwards to make 3 mainline sequels. Granted, they've gone in a different direction at Bethesda, and the later games don't share many similarities with Daggerfall's design and gameplay loop. It was a game that challenged my beliefs and preconceptions about RPGs before going into it, and gave me a newfound appreciation for certain systems such as free character templates that we don't see in many RPGs nowadays, as usually we are shoehorned into options the developers feel are correct or the quote-unquote fun way to play according to them. A game like Daggerfall, while not truly limitless, I'd argue is different enough to warrant there to be more than just story-based open-world RPGs with points of interest for us to see. But to deviate from this cycle, a company would have to lean into an emergent narrative more so, and find a way to keep this loop fresh enough for a player to press on in the face of things they're not used to or uncomfortable with. It's an experience I'm glad I had, and I hope you enjoyed hearing about it in this video. Thank you for your time and for watching. If you'd like to support me, the easiest way would be by subscribing to the YouTube. It lets me know you enjoy longer discussion pieces on RPGs or more older RPGs. You're also free to specify in the comments, agree or disagree with anything I said here. Thank you again for watching, and stay safe.